We're on site with the Measured podcast at MREC 2025, filming from the RSC booth. A great opportunity to catch up with friends and colleagues, and I roped a few of them into chatting about what they're up to and how they're helping changing the industry. In this chat, I sit down with Rayleen Hargreaves, Principal Consultant at Snowden Optiro in Perth. Rayleen specializes in reconciliation and has a few papers out there that I personally love and take a lot of value out of for my own work in this space. We talk about some of the classical issues with reconciliation and what is new out there. Hope you get something out of this chat and enjoy. Do you see any of the landscape shifting technically at all?
I purely because everybody's still in Excel for reconciliation.
Just for that simple reason, yeah.
Yeah, so people talk about AI and everything, and it's just like you've got to take the first step
6 decades behind,
out of your Excel spreadsheets first, and then we'll talk about what's down the track. So I guess there are some sites that are ready, but we're not investing in it right now. We'll do that in the next year or two.
So is that the same problem that we've been talking about as an industry, right? Is that proof of concept paralysis? I mean, are people that you are trying to sell this? I mean, because everybody must conceptually get that it's important, right?
Yes,
because they all put their KPIs on it and they're still linked to their Excel spreadsheets and they can still see how clunky it is. Why is it so hard to break through the mold here as an industry from where you're sitting? Not unrelated to the software, right? But purely principally, why is it not moving?
Honestly, I don't know, and I've been trying to convince people for 20 years that they need to move out of their Excel spreadsheets. Yeah. They need to get away from having any kind of human error, because that's what the spreadsheets are full of, human error. But why aren't they doing it? I think it's the return on investment. They want to know what the return on investment is. And unfortunately for reconciliation, it will identify the issues, but it won't fix the problem. And unless you go and fix the problem or address it and then assign it back to reconciliation as the identifier, then how do you work out what the return on investment is on actually moving out of Excel and into software to prove that it's going to be valuable?
Yeah. And is that because even at the technical level at big sites, because that's the people who probably have the funds available to actually do something. Is it because at the high technical level people are still not quite seeing the entire scope of the reconciliation process, because everybody's responsible for their own little islands? And this is pointed out in the literature, which I wanted to talk to you about, right? Because the few of the key authors in the space make this comment very clearly in the papers about the responsibility. If you look for little control F in all the papers on reconciliation, the 25, 30 odd papers that are out there, that is a common word that I find fascinating. So is it because it's just so disjointed that it just can't be anybody's responsibility to sign off on that responsibility, on that reconciliation expense?
Yeah, I think, so the people that are usually responsible for the end of month report, if we go back to it, and so many sites, it's the geologists that are compiling that data, right? Yeah. And the geologists don't tend to be in that executive suite that providing the funding for moving out of like an Excel spreadsheet into a final solution, a software solution. But I think it's just a case of there's still the silos, and so you've got the silos between the people that are compiling the report, the people that are wanting the report are typically like your superintendent geologists, but it's usually mine managers who are engineers, and then you've got your plant people, and so they're all still owning their own data by actually by compiling all of that data and then having ownership. And I guess what I'm trying to say is more of a feedback loop. So don't just use the end of month report as the final numbers. It's got a feedback. So you've got to find variances, and we'll always expect a variance between numbers, between the plant and your models and so forth. It's feeding back and actually getting the communication going in the team. So I think the biggest change that needs to happen on site is to have reconciliation meetings, whether they be monthly or quarterly even, just actually establish that with stakeholders from each department who are there to discuss the numbers that the reporting is actually giving them, and looking at the variances and looking for opportunities to reduce that variance.
Well, if we break that down a little bit, right, because as I like to point out with my data quality hat on, if you actually look at a reconciliation graph for a site, I always say to people, what's on the x-axis, right? It's time. And the moment time is on the x-axis, it's a quality control plot. Right, but it's just the highest level quality control plot of your organization, and the entire purpose of quality control is optimization and learning from mistakes and fixing things. But it's treated as a compliance thing or as a KPI thing, and not as the continuous feedback loop that it is intended to do. But maybe so the second part to that, if we agree on that conceptually, right? Why is it that? Because I think the solution can be, let's say, I think pointing out what needs to change is the usual stuff with looking for better practices difficult in this industry. We're still doing explicit modeling 22 years after implicit, all that sort of rubbish, right? So, but what would happen if we start acknowledging that it shouldn't be just a geologist that is layered somewhere in the MRM team, because then it becomes this us against them silo thing. Why couldn't we just put a reconciliation at the top level? So you have your production, you have your med boys and girls, and you have, and at that level, you just have to, it doesn't have to be a team of 50, but you drag it out of there, and that there is ownership at the highest level in reconciliation. That would change. Look,
there are companies out there that we work with that are starting to do that. Yeah, okay. And you can definitely tell they stand out.
Okay, right. So that's
it does work.
Okay, right. Because then you get away, because you can't force silos to merge by just shouting at the world.
No, not at all.
So it's part an organizational problem, and if you go in to consult to these groups, right? I mean, because we probably do similar work in that space, but you get to a site, and particularly reconciliation, it's not going to just be that belt sampler is biased, right?
No.
Because they know, and that's not really the problem. It's going to be a people problem, and if it's not a people problem, you can say it's a process problem because the structure isn't right, but that by itself is a people problem. How do you deal with that? Because it's political, there's cultural issues, there is big companies with other sites do this and that. I mean, that in a 5-day site visit, you can't break through that. How do you unravel that?
It's a really tough one, because especially in some of the third world countries, there's people's jobs on the line when you identify issues that
you're throwing hand grenades.
Absolutely, and we've got a couple of case studies where we identified trucks being underloaded but claiming full loads, and that obviously creates more haulage, so more payment, and that's it's tough. But I go in there as an independent person and looking at the mine from just my own experience, having had a range of opportunities now to look at different reconciliation systems and what feeds into their systems as well. To go in there with an independent mind, and I document it all. With what they want to do with it is then at their discretion. But I think as a consultant, you have to go in there agnostic and actually say what is the problem.
Well, so this is interesting because, but that makes it hard as well, because that's not always what they expect you to do, right?
No.
Because if you get hired as a consultant, then they expect you to talk about the belt sampler, and then suddenly you have this whole paragraph. And I think, I think that Bill and Sally are not really, doing what they should be doing, and that can be pretty awkward. No, I still remember going to a site. This was many, many years ago, and being asked what I was doing. I was training for Reconciler, and the mine manager was like, "Oh, well, is that all you're doing?" And I'm like, "Okay." While I'm there, I'll document anything I notice. And there was a huge list of just things that I was geology 101 that they weren't doing, and I gave that to him, and he was mind blown at the end of that week. He was just like, wow, and that was just me not even doing an audit, but just picking things up as I went along. And if you, sorry to interrupt, but as you now write your proposals, you probably anticipate already that some of that is going to happen. So you probably want some real executive buy-in for that proposal from their side as well, that you know. So that it doesn't become a silo of this, because you might be hired by the MRM department, but then obviously when you go visit the plant to look at the pheasant sample is there, then you could.
Yeah, we call it we call it a gap analysis now and recommendations.
Right,
so we're a bit softer.
It's
you know, I've learned over the years.
I know what you're talking about. That's that's very good. And so maybe just to change course a little bit, but is there anything still? Is there anything still to be written from a peer-reviewed perspective on this stuff, or is it all out there? Because and the reason I ask, because you know your last paper with the R factors, that's taken a reasonable. The people, I saw something come out the other day that referenced that, not quite correctly though. I remember. That's not an R factor anyway.
The attempt is there.
The attempt was, but the problem with that is if people start putting stuff out there that doesn't align, and particularly in reconciliation, I find it quite interesting that when you put everything together, the nomenclature is still not clear between papers. People still make subtle different references to the same nodes that could make it difficult for you to align the system approach, because the F factor is in principle simple, but no operations are ever the same. So do you still feel that there is a gap for something to bring it all together, or do we have enough between the 2 or 3 key papers and between the Parkers and various
Probably
papers?
over the last year, I've probably stopped talking about the factors as much as I have in the past, for that reason that you've just highlighted, that there's just nuances between different companies that are referring to an F factor or an R factor. So I've gone back to saying, tell me what you're actually comparing, resource to reserve, or...
So you come back to Craig Morley's philosophy.
Yes, like the Anglo-American. I think there's no confusion at all with what you're showing. So our software will let you do the factors, but it'll let you define your factors, okay? So it's not an F factor or F1, it's whatever you want to call it. So if BHP wants to call it the reserve to, their mining, whatever they want to do, they can call it that. So you define it in the software, but you've also got the opportunity to say it's the resource to reserve or whatever it might be.
You can literally type in that box and call it whatever you want it to.
Yes, exactly. So in regards to papers and what else we need to do more underground reconciliation. I think we've heard this week that there's going to be more underground mining. Okay, it's not going away, it's going to get bigger. The mines are going to get deeper, and we need to actually have some guidelines around underground reconciliation. There is limited material out there. I get asked on numerous occasions, is there any papers that you can send me on underground reconciliation? And I struggle to find.
Give me an example.
So just how to do their reconciliation, their depletions really. It's the depletions of the stopes or the depletions of the block cave, whatever it might be, and then comparing that against the other models and against their mining and so forth. So it's just that whole process. From Snowden Optiro's point of view, we're talking about having a common volume and actually depleting that common volume because you've got waste involved, and then just pulling out the ore from that. But at least you're getting all of the ore that has been mined from that. So we'll look to get a paper out on that next year, just some guidelines, around what we can offer the industry.
Nice. And is it just you, or who else is working on that with you?
We'll look at Snowden Optiro, so it'll be probably Tarrant Alkington and Ian Glacken, and we'll try and get a case study with one of our clients.
We'll be looking out for that.
I'm hoping to get that together very soon.
And then there is obviously that will lead to continuous improvement in the software as well, which is still...
Yes, that's right. So we've got Reconciler itself can deal with underground mining, and we've got plenty of underground mining clients. But we're looking at how we can actually show that spatially as well.
And how are you seeing, things like PowerBI being either a threat or a different way to look at collecting the data here? Is that something that you monitor, or?
We are totally embracing Power BI. So I never wanted to compete in that space. We are not a business improvement tool as such, a software solution as such. We are a reconciliation solution. So what we've done is we've built an API that can actually pull the data out of Reconciler, publish to your dashboard, and then the next version of Reconciler that comes out next month or the month after, you will be able to publish your Power BI dashboard within a window frame in Reconciler. So as a user, you will feel like you're not leaving Reconciler, but you're actually looking at your Power BI dashboard. So again, we're not competing, we're working with it.
And that can be, because everything is cloud-based apparently. So people, management groups want all of this stuff to live in the cloud so that they can watch all their operations from there.
Have you been looking at my roadmap, René?
So maybe. Well, these are all the common things that I guess people think about. So that's all on it.
Yeah, so we are about to go cloud-enabled within the next 12 months.
Okay,
so
cool.
yeah, we're going on a big journey with the production portfolio at DataMine. So and Reconciler's first cab off the rank for that.
That must be exciting.
It is.
Because you put a lot of time in this over the years.
Absolutely, and it's just like we're not going to lose the ability to have an on-site or on-premise application at all, because there are some sites that just won't have connectivity to the cloud. So exactly. So we will offer both solutions, but we're definitely going down that path with the cloud. We tried to do it about 6 years ago. And mining was not ready.
Not ready?
Not ready, firewall security and so forth. So we parked it, and the time is right, the funding is right. So
that's all about timing with this stuff. So,
it is. That's why I say small steps, and we'll get there.
Keep going at it. Appreciate it, Rayleen.
Thanks
for
you.
chatting.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.